The first thing anyone noticed was not the letter. It was the silence that surrounded it, as though an entire plantation had quietly agreed to pretend it had never existed. In the spring of 1836, on a rice plantation along the tidal rivers of South Carolina, meticulous records documented every aspect of daily life. Account books listed names, inventories counted every mule, rice receipts tracked each harvest, and enslaved men, women, and children were assigned prices that reduced human lives to property. Yet among all those carefully preserved records, one name appeared only once before disappearing without explanation. For nearly 2 centuries, historians examining plantation archives encountered the same unsettling pattern. Tax records remained intact, probate files survived, and family Bibles carefully recorded births and deaths across generations. Even ordinary letters exchanged between wealthy plantation owners endured wars, floods, and neglect, but the trail of one young woman abruptly ended. She was the plantation owner's daughter, yet her portrait quietly vanished from later family collections, her inheritance changed under mysterious circumstances, and court records revealed a legal dispute that made little sense unless someone had deliberately tried to erase what had happened. As researchers dug deeper, the mystery only grew more complex. Hidden throughout county archives were scattered fragments that seemed unrelated at first: a shipping manifest, a church register bearing an unusual correction, a physician's hastily written bill, and a tiny newspaper notice so insignificant that most readers would have overlooked it entirely. Individually, none of these records revealed much. Together, however, they suggested the existence of a secret capable of destroying the reputation of one of South Carolina's most respected plantation families. At the center of the mystery stood a man whose identity survived only because plantation records once assigned him a monetary value. He was an enslaved laborer whose own words were never recorded. No diary preserved his thoughts, no monument carried his name, and no family history told his story. His presence reached the modern world only through plantation ledgers, courtroom testimony, and documents written by people who had every reason to conceal the truth. Historians have long recognized that some of the deepest mysteries of American slavery are not found in famous rebellions or dramatic confrontations, but in missing pages, altered records, crossed-out names, and generations of deliberate silence. Sometimes what an official document refuses to say reveals far more than what it openly records. In this case, the silence surrounding one plantation owner's daughter and one enslaved man endured for nearly 2 centuries before forgotten records, preserved more by accident than intention, began revealing a very different story. It became a story of power, fear, and loyalty tested within one of history's most brutal systems. Above all, it was the story of a single decision made in 1836 that forced an entire plantation to rewrite its own history. The real question was never whether the secret existed. The far more unsettling question was why so many people devoted the rest of their lives to ensuring that no one would ever uncover it. The county clerk who handled the probate file was not looking for a mystery. He was simply trying to settle an estate. In Charleston District during the late 1830s, deaths among wealthy planters almost always produced an avalanche of paperwork. Property had to be counted, land had to be surveyed, livestock, tools, furniture, and enslaved people were carefully inventoried because every item represented money. The records followed familiar patterns. Until this one. The estate belonged to a respected rice planter whose family had spent decades building influence along the lowcountry rivers. His name appeared regularly in tax rolls, shipping records, and advertisements placed in South Carolina newspapers. Merchants trusted him, local officials knew him, ministers dined at his table. Nothing about his public life suggested disorder. Yet tucked inside the probate packet sat a folded memorandum without a signature. Only one sentence had been written across the outside. Not to be entered unless required. No explanation followed. Whether the clerk obeyed those instructions remains unclear. The memorandum survived. That alone was unusual. Most informal notes disappeared once estates were settled. This one somehow remained attached to the official papers. Modern archivists have never agreed on why. The contents themselves were surprisingly brief. No confession. No dramatic accusation. Just a list of initials. Several dates. And one instruction concerning an enslaved field hand whose name appeared nowhere else in the estate. It looked less like a legal order. More like a reminder someone hoped would never become public. That should have ended there. Instead, another record surfaced almost 30 miles away. At the parish church responsible for recording baptisms, marriages, and burials, an aging register contained something historians rarely expect to find. An erased line. The ink had been scraped away so aggressively that fibers from the paper lifted beneath it. Whoever attempted the correction had damaged the page itself. Even after nearly 2 centuries, faint impressions remained. Not enough to recover every word. Enough to identify a surname. It matched the plantation owner's family. That discovery puzzled researchers for years. Church registers were valuable legal documents. They were not altered casually. Especially not by ministers whose reputations depended upon accurate record keeping. Something important had happened. Something worth removing. Meanwhile, the plantation itself continued operating as though nothing had changed. Rice cultivation demanded relentless labor. The tides determined every working day. Floodgates opened and closed with precise timing. Canals required constant maintenance. Thousands of acres depended upon coordination that left little room for personal drama. Plantation journals reflected that routine. Workers assigned. Tools issued. Rice harvested. Weather noted. Nothing unusual. At least on the surface. Then came an entry unlike the others. One overseer, writing in cramped handwriting near the bottom of a weekly report, added only 6 unexpected words. Several hands remain unwilling to speak. No names. No explanation. Nothing more. The following week's report omitted the sentence entirely. So did every report afterward. Yet silence itself became evidence. Historians studying plantation management know overseers rarely documented emotional conditions unless production suffered. Fear could reduce harvests. Rumors could encourage resistance. Distrust could spread faster than disease. For an overseer to acknowledge silence suggested something extraordinary had unsettled the workforce. Not violence. Violence unfortunately appeared often enough. This felt different. The workers were watching. Waiting. Refusing to discuss something. That alarmed management. Elsewhere, neighboring planters began exchanging unusually cautious letters. Most dealt with business. Rice prices. Shipping schedules. Labor shortages. Insurance claims after storms. Then one correspondent inserted an odd request. He advised his friend not to receive unnecessary visitors from the Western Tract. The wording stood out. Visitors normally brought business opportunities. Not concern. Who exactly lived on the Western Tract remained unclear. The letter never said. Nor did it explain why arrivals should be discouraged. Only that discretion would prove wise. That single phrase has fascinated researchers because it appeared during precisely the same season as the altered church register. Coincidence seemed possible. Until another document emerged. This one came from a physician. Doctors serving plantation districts often kept account books listing house calls, medicines, and travel expenses. Most entries were routine. Broken bones. Fevers. Childhood illnesses. Insects. Accidents involving horses. One page contained an unfamiliar notation. The physician charged for travel after midnight. That alone was expensive. Night journeys across the rice country were dangerous. Dense marshes, shifting tides, and poor roads discouraged unnecessary movement. Yet the destination listed only one word. Landing. No family name. No plantation. No patient. Just landing. Even stranger, the physician charged for absolute confidentiality. Such language rarely appeared in ordinary accounts. Someone paid extra. Someone wealthy. Someone anxious. The physician never explained why. The next surviving page had been torn from the ledger. Whether intentionally or through ordinary wear can no longer be determined. Either way, whatever followed disappeared. Years passed. The plantation changed owners. Buildings decayed. Floods reshaped portions of the surrounding landscape. The Civil War arrived. Then Reconstruction. Generations came and went. Most people connected to the old estate vanished from memory. But county records have a remarkable habit. They wait. Long after witnesses die. Long after families scatter. Paper remains patient. In the early 20th century, a local historian began assembling notes about prominent plantation families. He interviewed elderly residents whose parents had lived through slavery. Few remembered exact dates. Many remembered stories. One elderly carpenter refused to discuss the plantation directly. Instead, he offered a curious warning. He said older men had always advised children never to ask why one particular cemetery plot remained unmarked. When pressed for details, he simply shook his head. Some things, he reportedly said, were buried twice. The historian dismissed the remark. It sounded like folklore. He filed it away anyway. Decades later, another researcher rediscovered those interview notes. What caught his attention was not the warning. It was the location. The unnamed burial ground sat remarkably close to the plantation landing mentioned in the physician's ledger. Two unrelated sources, separated by generations, pointing toward the same isolated stretch of riverbank. Curiosity grew. Archaeologists never excavated the site. Permission was denied repeatedly by landowners. Officially, there was no reason to disturb old ground. Unofficially, resistance seemed unusually determined. Questions lingered. Why protect an abandoned corner of forgotten property? Why refuse even limited surveys? No clear answer emerged. Meanwhile, fresh attention returned to the probate records. A graduate student reviewing estate inventories noticed something almost everyone else had overlooked. The unnamed enslaved laborer connected to the mysterious memorandum did appear elsewhere after all. Not by name. By number. Plantation inventories often assigned identification numbers for accounting purposes. One particular number appeared consistently beside healthy adult field hands. Then, without explanation, the same number vanished midway through 1836. No sale. No death. No escape notice. Nothing. That absence mattered. South Carolina newspapers routinely published advertisements seeking captured fugitives. Rewards encouraged cooperation across county lines. Escapes generated paperwork because enslaved people represented valuable property. If the man fled, someone should have recorded it. No advertisement has ever been found. No sheriff's notice. No insurance claim. No receipt documenting a sale to another plantation. He simply disappeared from the accounting system, as though someone preferred not to acknowledge where he had gone. Or why? The missing number troubled historians because plantation bookkeeping prized consistency. Financial records depended upon precision. Errors cost money. Intentional omissions served purposes. What purpose remained uncertain. The deeper researchers looked, the stranger the pattern became. A church record altered. A physician's missing page. An unsigned memorandum. Workers refusing to speak. Letters urging discretion. A vanished identification number. Each clue alone seemed harmless. Together, they formed the outline of deliberate concealment. Still, one question overshadowed every other. Who benefited? The answer seemed obvious. Until another estate file surfaced in neighboring Georgetown district. Inside lay an affidavit written by a traveling merchant. He had no known connection to the plantation. No family ties. No financial interest. Yet he swore under oath that during the autumn of 1836 he witnessed two respected landowners arguing in unusually heated terms beside the Charleston wharf. According to his statement, only one sentence remained clear in his memory. If that ledger is ever opened, one man warned, none of us will survive the disgrace. The affidavit named both men. One was the dead planter whose estate had already raised so many questions. The other had never appeared in the investigation before. He owned the neighboring plantation. And according to shipping records, his warehouse contained dozens of account books that historians believed had been destroyed decades earlier. Except one ledger had not been destroyed at all. It had been misplaced. And when archivists finally located it beneath a stack of unrelated commercial papers, they discovered several pages sewn together by hand. As though someone had wanted to make absolutely certain no reader would ever see what had been written inside. The thread holding the pages together was not part of the original ledger. It had been added later. The stitching was rough. Not the careful work of a professional bookbinder. More like someone with a needle working quickly, determined that curious hands would give up before reaching the hidden pages beneath. When conservators finally separated the paper without damaging the ink, they did not find a confession. They found accounting entries. At first glance, nothing seemed remarkable. Barrels of rice. Payments to merchants in Charleston. Repairs to floodgates after heavy rain. The familiar rhythm of plantation business continued line after line. Then halfway down one page, the handwriting changed. The figures became smaller. The wording became cautious. Instead of naming people directly, the clerk used initials. Instead of describing events, he referred to the matter. That phrase appeared again and again. Expenses connected to the matter. Travel required for the matter. Compensation delayed because of the matter. Whoever wrote the ledger assumed everyone involved already understood what those words meant. No explanation was ever written. Historians studying 19th-century business records recognized the style immediately. Sensitive transactions were often disguised. Not because they were illegal. Because reputation mattered. A single scandal could damage credit, partnerships, and political influence across the Lowcountry. The plantation owners of coastal South Carolina relied on trust as much as wealth. Once that trust disappeared, lenders became cautious. Neighbors became distant. Rumors spread faster than newspapers. One entry stood apart from the rest. It listed payment to a ferryman. No cargo. No destination. Only a date. The same week, the unnamed field hand vanished from plantation records. The ferryman himself never left an account. But decades later, federal census records identified an elderly waterman living along the same stretch of river. Local interviews conducted near the end of his life preserved one unusual memory. He spoke of a crossing that earned more silver than a season's work. He refused to describe the passengers. He refused to identify the plantation. Every question received the same answer. I carried living men. Nothing more. That sentence lingered. Not because of what it revealed. Because of what it carefully avoided. Elsewhere, another clue surfaced in a sheriff's expense book. Sheriffs routinely billed counties for travel, arrests, and legal notices. One payment from late 1836 covered a journey to the plantation district. No arrest followed. No warrant appeared. No court hearing resulted. Yet someone had requested the sheriff's presence. Why summon county authority if no official action was taken? Researchers searched court dockets. Nothing. Grand jury records. Nothing. Magistrate's notes. Nothing again. It was as though the visit had occurred outside the formal legal system. That possibility unsettled historians. Influential planters often settled difficult matters privately. Not everything reached a courtroom. Sometimes preserving public order meant avoiding public proceedings altogether. The sheriff's account included one curious detail. He claimed reimbursement for waiting nearly 5 hours before returning home. Waiting for whom? The record never said. While examining tax records from neighboring plantations, one researcher noticed another inconsistency. Labor totals changed unexpectedly. One estate reported gaining an experienced field hand without documenting a purchase. Another reported no corresponding loss. Under ordinary circumstances, such discrepancies attracted attention. Enslaved labor represented enormous financial value. Transfers required paperwork. Paperwork generated taxes. Taxes produced receipts. Here the trail simply ended. Modern archivists debated whether the omission resulted from poor record-keeping. Most concluded otherwise. The surrounding documents were unusually precise. Only this transaction remained invisible. Then came the first real twist. A bundle of private correspondence donated by descendants of a Charleston merchant included a letter folded inside an unrelated account book. Its author had visited several plantations during the autumn of 1836. He complained about declining rice prices, difficult roads, unreliable weather. Then one sentence interrupted the routine business discussion. The gentlemen remain united, though plainly frightened. Not worried. Not concerned. Frightened. The distinction mattered. These were wealthy landowners accustomed to commanding hundreds of acres and dozens of lives. Fear did not often appear in descriptions of men holding such power. Whatever united them had also shaken them. The merchant offered no explanation. Perhaps he did not know. Perhaps he knew too much. On the plantation itself, routine continued. Harvests were gathered. Canals repaired. Boats loaded. Visitors noticed no obvious disruption. Yet small details hinted at strain beneath the surface. An overseer resigned unexpectedly after only 8 months. His replacement lasted less than a year. Neither left a reason. Employment contracts from the period rarely included personal explanations. Still, turnover at prosperous plantations remained uncommon. Experienced overseers rarely abandoned secure positions without cause. One left behind a pocket notebook. Most pages contained measurements of dikes and irrigation channels. One page had been torn nearly in half. Enough remained to preserve a single unfinished sentence. After what was seen near the landing, the rest vanished. No continuation followed. No names appeared. Only silence. Generations later, historians found themselves studying absences as carefully as surviving words. Missing pages. Scraped ink. Unrecorded transfers. Broken sequences. Each gap carried weight. Each omission seemed intentional. Another discovery emerged from church financial records. Not the register that had been altered. A separate ledger documenting charitable donations. Several respected plantation owners contributed unusually large sums within weeks of one another. The donations were not extraordinary because of their size. They were extraordinary because they came all at once. Nothing in local history suggested a hurricane, epidemic, or major fire requiring emergency relief. Why the sudden generosity? Some scholars suggested genuine religious conviction. Others wondered whether public charity sometimes helped repair private reputations. No document answered the question, but the timing refused to disappear. As researchers compared names across records, another pattern emerged. Nearly every man connected to the hidden memorandum, the sheriff's visit, the merchant's letter, and the stitched ledger belonged to the same circle. They traded together, attended the same churches, served on the same county committees, sat together during elections. If one man's reputation collapsed, the others would inevitably face questions. Protecting a neighbor could also protect oneself. That possibility changed the investigation. Perhaps this was never one family's secret. Perhaps several influential men had agreed that silence served everyone. Yet even that theory left one problem. The unnamed field hand. Nothing explained why his identity disappeared so completely. The answer arrived from an unexpected source. Insurance papers. Rice plantations frequently insured buildings, equipment, and occasionally valuable enslaved craftsmen. One insurance survey described laborers by skill rather than name. Carpenter. Blacksmith. Cooper. Boatman. One classification appeared only once. Reader. The notation startled historians. South Carolina law increasingly restricted literacy among enslaved people after fears of organized resistance spread during the early 19th century. A literate enslaved man represented opportunity. He also represented anxiety. Someone capable of reading letters, ledgers, and legal notices possessed knowledge unavailable to most laborers. The insurance survey never identified him. But the description appeared on the same plantation. During the same year. Then disappeared forever. Researchers suddenly reconsidered the stitched ledger. What if the missing field hand had not merely worked the fields? What if he had occasionally handled written records? That possibility altered everything. Someone able to read could notice inconsistencies. He could recognize signatures. He could understand contracts. Most importantly, he could remember what passed through his hands. Plantation owners trusted only a handful of enslaved men with such responsibilities. Trust created opportunity. Opportunity created danger. The theory remained speculative. Until another fragment surfaced. This time it came from the records of a Charleston law office. Attorneys often copied outgoing correspondence into large bound volumes. One unsigned draft referred to the educated servant whose continued presence threatens unnecessary inquiry. The client name had been cut away. The destination page had been removed. Still the wording stood. Educated servant. Threatens inquiry. No accusation. No crime. Only concern. The lawyer recommended quiet resolution. Nothing more. The phrase echoed the memorandum discovered months earlier. Not to be entered unless required. Different documents. Different authors. The same instinct. Keep matters quiet. Keep them off the record. Keep them contained. Late in the 20th century, a preservation team revisiting the plantation grounds uncovered the stone foundation of an outbuilding long believed destroyed. Most expected another storage shed. Instead, they found iron hinges heavy enough for reinforced doors. Fragments of broken glass, charcoal, and dozens of tiny scraps of burned paper mixed into the soil. Too damaged to reconstruct. Too numerous to dismiss. Someone had burned documents there. Not household waste. Documents. The fragments were sent for examination. Nearly all proved unreadable. Except one. Only 4 words survived. A ledger delivered before dawn. No date. No signature. No names. Just enough to raise another impossible question. If one ledger had been hidden with thread, how many others had been destroyed before anyone could read them? And if a surviving ledger had been important enough to conceal, what was so dangerous that even fire had not been considered sufficient to erase it? As archivists searched for an answer, they uncovered one final notation buried inside a shipping register from Charleston Harbor. A vessel departed the coast only days after the mysterious sheriff's visit. Among its cargo was rice, lumber, and supplies. At the bottom of the manifest, squeezed into the margin in handwriting unlike the clerk's, appeared 2 words that had never attracted attention before. Special passenger. No name followed. No fare was recorded. No destination beyond the port itself. Yet when historians compared the ink with the stitched ledger, they reached a startling conclusion. Both entries appeared to have been written by the same hand. And that meant the man hiding information inside the plantation ledger had also been tracking someone who left South Carolina under circumstances no official record was willing to explain. The matching handwriting changed the entire investigation. For decades, researchers had assumed the stitched ledger and the harbor manifest came from unrelated collections. Now they appeared to be connected by the same clerk. That meant one man had witnessed events both inside the plantation and at the Charleston docks. His identity was not difficult to establish. His role was: he was never listed as a plantation owner. He never appeared among elected officials. He left behind no personal diary. Instead, his name surfaced quietly in merchant correspondence. He worked as a confidential bookkeeper. Trusted. Educated. Expected to keep records without asking questions. That made him unusually valuable. It also made him dangerous. Bookkeepers occupied an uncomfortable place in plantation society. They knew debts before creditors did. They saw wills before heirs. They copied letters that were never meant for strangers. And sometimes, they handled information that powerful men preferred to forget. The more historians followed his trail, the more often he disappeared just before important events. His signature vanished from one ledger, reappeared in another county, then surfaced again months later in Charleston. He seemed to move whenever the matter appeared in surviving records. That pattern was impossible to ignore. One document from early 1837 revealed something unexpected. The bookkeeper requested payment for replacing several account books damaged by moisture. Such requests were ordinary. His next sentence was not. He advised his employer that certain earlier volumes should remain beyond recovery. Not lost. Not destroyed. Beyond recovery. The wording suggested intent. Someone wanted particular records to stay inaccessible forever. The request received immediate approval. No questions. No objections. Just a signature authorizing the expense. Historians studying plantation bookkeeping noticed another subtle change. After 1836, the estate abandoned its old numbering system for enslaved workers. Every identification number was reassigned. Fresh sequences replaced older ones. To modern readers, the revision appeared harmless. To archivists, it looked deliberate. Renumbering complicated every future comparison. One missing individual became far harder to trace. Almost as if confusion itself had become useful. Meanwhile, a separate collection of church disciplinary records produced another surprise. The congregation had investigated one of its own members. Not for theft. Not for violence. For spreading injurious speculation. The accused was a respected carpenter employed on neighboring property. His punishment was unusually mild. He received only a warning. That puzzled historians. Church discipline during the period could be severe. Public criticism of influential men often carried consequences. Yet this carpenter escaped with little more than a reprimand. Why? His testimony survived. Only part of it. He admitted discussing events at the river landing with several laborers after Sunday services. He insisted he had repeated only what everyone already feared. The church elders immediately interrupted him. The remaining lines of testimony disappeared beneath heavy ink. Blotted out. Not crossed through. Covered. Modern imaging recovered only a handful of words. He never returned. Boat before daylight. Ordered silence. Nothing else. Still, the fragments deepened the mystery. Fear had spread beyond one plantation. Neighbors were talking. Church leaders knew it. Someone wanted the conversation stopped. Not because they were necessarily false. Because they were becoming dangerous. By then, the surviving witnesses had begun disappearing from the historical record. One elderly overseer relocated to Georgia. A ferryman vanished from county tax rolls. The physician closed his coastal practice. Coincidence remained possible. Yet the timing continued to trouble researchers. People connected to the story rarely remained nearby for long. One exception stood out. A blacksmith. Unlike others, he stayed. Year after year. His account books survived because his descendants preserved them inside a family trunk. The entries focused on ordinary work. Repairing wagon wheels. Forging hinges. Sharpening plows. Then, during November 1836, business changed abruptly. He received repeated orders for iron chains. Not unusual by themselves. But every order specified the same length. Exactly 12 feet. The chains were delivered to different plantations. Paid for by different owners. Yet the measurements never varied. Historians debated the significance. No explanation satisfied everyone. Agricultural needs differed from estate to estate. Uniform orders across multiple plantations were uncommon. The blacksmith added one final note. Requested in haste. That phrase echoed through later discussions. Haste. Silence. Confidentiality. Special passenger. The same atmosphere surrounded every surviving clue. Then came another twist. Researchers searching Charleston newspaper archives expected to find runaway advertisements. Instead, they found an editorial. It criticized unnamed citizens who believed private arrangements should stand above public justice. No names appeared. No plantation was identified. Readers at the time likely viewed it as political commentary. Today it reads differently. Especially because the article appeared only 3 days after the sheriff's mysterious visit. Did the editor know something? Or was he responding to rumors already spreading through Charleston? The answer remains uncertain. What is certain is that no follow-up article ever appeared. The subject vanished from print. As though someone had successfully discouraged further reporting. One county commissioner left behind personal notebooks. Unlike official records, these contained candid observations. He rarely mentioned individuals directly. Instead, he described moods, tensions, conversations overheard after meetings. One entry from late 1836 stood apart. "The gentleman spoke very softly today." He added another sentence. "No one wished to be first." No context followed. Researchers puzzled over those words. First to do what? Speak. Accuse. Confess. The commissioner never clarified. His notebook moved on to bridge repairs and tax assessments. Yet the image lingered. Powerful men. Speaking quietly. Waiting for someone else to begin. Across the river districts, enslaved communities preserved memories differently. Most written records came from owners. But oral traditions sometimes survived through later interviews. One account collected decades after emancipation described an unnamed man known simply as the Reader. According to the elderly narrator, the man occasionally interpreted letters for others despite enormous personal risk. He warned fellow laborers never to repeat what he read. Not because the information belonged to him. Because knowing too much could be fatal. Historians treated the interview cautiously. Memory changes across generations. Names disappear. Details shift. Yet one description stood out. The narrator recalled that the Reader went away on the water before sunrise. That image matched the ferryman's statement almost perfectly. No proof connected the two accounts. But the parallels were difficult to dismiss. Then researchers uncovered something nobody expected. A customs ledger from Charleston listed supplies loaded aboard the same vessel carrying the unidentified special passenger. Among the cargo appeared a locked wooden chest. Unlike ordinary freight, this chest received its own notation. To remain unopened. No consignee was listed. No description of contents. Only instructions. The chest vanished after departure. It never appeared in receiving records. If it reached another port, those documents have not survived. Some historians proposed money. Others suggested legal papers. A few believed it contained plantation correspondence. Nobody knows. But the coincidence was striking. A secretive passenger. A sealed chest. The same voyage. The same mysterious handwriting. Back at the plantation, the financial consequences slowly emerged. The estate sold several parcels of land within 2 years. That surprised economic historians. Rice production remained profitable during much of the period. There was no obvious financial collapse. Why reduce holdings? One explanation involved debt. Another involved legal pressure hidden from public view. The account books hinted at unusually large cash withdrawals. No purpose was recorded. Only amounts. Enough to attract attention. Not enough to explain. One attorney reviewing the records reached a cautious conclusion. Someone had spent considerable money resolving a problem that never reached court. That was expensive. It was also effective. Because no surviving lawsuit revealed the underlying dispute. Perhaps there never was one. Perhaps preventing litigation had been the objective from the beginning. Late one evening, while examining overlooked correspondence inside a regional archive, a doctoral student noticed faint writing visible only where a letter had been folded. Ink from another sheet had transferred onto it. Mirror reversed. Barely readable. Digital enhancement recovered part of the message. He cannot remain. Too many have seen. Remove every account. The original letter has never been found. Only its ghost remained. Even so, the fragments carried enormous weight. Someone believed a man's continued presence threatened everything. Not because of violence. Because witnesses existed. Too many had seen. Seen what? Researchers still could not answer. The clues pointed toward concealment. Not motive. That missing piece remained hidden. Then, almost by accident, another discovery surfaced hundreds of miles away. A plantation inventory from eastern Georgia listed the arrival of one newly acquired laborer during the winter of 1836. No seller's name appeared. Only this notation. Transferred by private arrangement from South Carolina. Such wording was highly unusual. Sales typically identified previous owners. This one did not. The laborer's age closely matched estimates for the missing field hand. His listed skill matched the insurance record. Literate. The room fell silent when historians realized what they were seeing. For the first time, there was evidence that the vanished man may not have died. He may have been moved. Quietly. Deliberately. Far beyond the reach of curious neighbors. But one final line beneath the inventory changed everything. Written in different ink months after the transfer were 5 simple words. No longer present, records returned. Returned where? Returned to whom? No explanation followed. And when researchers requested the accompanying transfer papers from the archive, they discovered the entire file had disappeared decades earlier under circumstances no archivist could explain. The missing transfer file should have ended the search. Instead, it reopened everything. Archivists are accustomed to gaps. Courthouses burned. Floods destroyed records. Paper decayed. But this disappearance looked different. The catalog listed the file. An accession number had been assigned. Someone had checked it out decades earlier. It was never returned. No explanation survived. That detail alone drew the attention of historians who specialized in plantation archives. Missing records were common. Missing records with a paper trail were not. One researcher decided to stop looking for the laborer. Instead, he followed the men who had tried to erase him. That decision changed the investigation. The neighboring planter whose warehouse had concealed the stitched ledger left behind more than business papers. His estate included correspondence with attorneys, merchants, and state officials. Most of it dealt with ordinary affairs. Taxes. River improvements. Insurance. Credit. Then, buried inside a packet of unrelated receipts, appeared a folded note with no signature. Only 3 lines. Delay the valuation. Remove the earlier inventory. No additional witnesses. Nothing identified the property. Nothing identified the people involved. Yet the handwriting matched the same cautious style seen throughout the earlier records. It was never direct. Always suggestive. Always careful. The phrase, "remove the earlier inventory," immediately caught attention. Inventories formed the backbone of plantation accounting. Replacing one was serious business. Every enslaved person represented taxable property. Any alteration risked questions from creditors and probate courts. Why replace an inventory unless the original contained something impossible to explain? Researchers returned to the probate packet. This time they examined not the writing, but the paper. Several sheets were slightly different. Not in color. In size. The edges had been trimmed. Under magnification, tiny stitch holes appeared along one margin. At least one page had once belonged to a different document. Someone had physically rebuilt the file before it reached the courthouse. That discovery stunned preservation experts. It suggested planning, not panic. Someone had taken the time to reconstruct an official record that appeared complete while quietly removing selected pages. The deception was remarkably skilled. For nearly 2 centuries, almost no one noticed. Elsewhere, another witness emerged through unexpected means. A federal land survey from the 1840s included sworn statements from local residents describing roads, ferries, and property boundaries. One elderly laborer mentioned an abandoned cabin near the river landing. Surveyors usually ignored such details. This one wrote it down. The laborer insisted no one had occupied the structure since the night the gentleman gathered. No date. No names. Only that phrase. The gentleman gathered. Historians compared it with the county commissioner's notebook. The gentleman spoke very softly today. Different sources. Different decades. The same anonymous description. It seemed increasingly likely that several influential men had met privately during the same critical period. But for what purpose? The answer remained hidden. The abandoned cabin itself no longer existed. Later flooding had altered the shoreline. Only foundation stones remained. Archaeological surveys found broken bottle glass, rusted nails, fragments of pipe stems. Nothing unusual. Until one volunteer uncovered a lead seal. The small object had once secured folded legal papers against tampering. Merchants used wax. Attorneys often used lead. Finding it beside a forgotten riverside cabin raised immediate questions. Why would legal documents ever be handled there? The seal carried no readable initials. Time had worn them away. Still, its presence suggested paperwork had changed hands far from any courthouse. Meanwhile, plantation correspondence grew noticeably colder. Men who had once exchanged friendly letters began limiting themselves to business. Pleasantries disappeared. Invitations stopped. One merchant complained that old acquaintances no longer trusted written communication. Instead, they preferred meetings. Private ones. Face to face. That subtle shift reflected a broader reality. Letters could be preserved. Witnesses could remember. Paper lasted longer than conversation. A historian studying Charleston banking records noticed another irregularity. Several prominent planters withdrew unusually large sums in hard currency during the winter following the mysterious transfer. Cash. Not credit. Not drafts. Coin. Large cash payments left fewer records once exchanged. The withdrawals occurred within days of each other. Coincidence seemed increasingly difficult to defend. One retired judge, writing decades later about legal customs before the Civil War, made an observation that suddenly felt relevant. He remarked that influential citizens often feared scandal more than prosecution. A criminal accusation might fail. Public disgrace rarely did. That sentence echoed through every surviving clue. Again and again, the documents suggested men protecting reputations. Not avoiding criminal trials. Protecting standing. Protecting influence. Protecting family names. Then another twist appeared. Researchers finally identified the confidential bookkeeper's final employer. It was not another plantation. It was a Charleston law office. His duties changed. No longer tracking harvests. Now copying legal correspondence. His salary increased sharply. His workload remained unusually light. One attorney even described him as reliable because he understands silence. The phrase was chilling. Reliable because he understands silence. Not skill. Not education. Silence. The bookkeeper himself died only a few years later. His probate inventory listed ordinary possessions. Furniture. Books. Clothing. One locked writing desk. The key was missing. When the desk was eventually opened by court order, it contained almost nothing. Most compartments were empty, except for one narrow drawer. Inside rested a folded sheet. Blank. At least it appeared blank. Modern conservation techniques later revealed faint iron-gall ink nearly erased by chemical treatment. Only scattered words survived. Incopied. Original destroyed. You cannot swear. A revert. The rest had vanished. Historians stared at those fragments for years. They revealed almost nothing. And yet everything. Someone had copied a document. Someone destroyed the original. Someone later admitted he could no longer swear to what it contained. Memory had begun replacing evidence. That realization carried enormous weight. The farther researchers traveled from 1836, the less they possessed. Not because history had forgotten. Because history had been edited. Across the surviving plantation journals, another subtle pattern emerged. After the mysterious events, disciplinary punishments increased dramatically. More patrols. More inspections. Fewer travel passes. Enslaved workers faced tighter restrictions than before. Owners often tightened control after rumors spread. Fear moved in both directions. The enslaved feared punishment. The owners feared knowledge. Knowledge could not easily be contained, especially among people working together every day. One former enslaved man interviewed after emancipation recalled hearing older laborers speak in unusually cautious ways whenever certain plantations were mentioned. He remembered no names. Only a warning. They said the paper was worse than the whip. Researchers puzzled over that sentence. What paper? A ledger? A contract? A statement? No one could answer. But the remark suggested documents themselves had become objects of fear. Not because they created truth. Because they preserved it. Late in the investigation, a family Bible surfaced at an estate sale. Its owners had no idea why historians were interested. Most pages recorded births and deaths. One loose sheet had been tucked inside generations earlier. It was not a diary. It was a list. 5 surnames. All belonging to respected Lowcountry families. Beside each appeared the same date. October 1836. No explanation. Only signatures. The paper looked almost ceremonial. Researchers first assumed it commemorated a business partnership. Then they noticed something else. One signature belonged to the neighboring planter. Another matched the dead estate owner. A third matched a county magistrate. 3 men already linked through entirely different records. Now connected again. What had they signed together? No title survived. The top of the page had been torn away. Without it, the document became another fragment. Another unanswered question. Still one clue remained. The fold marks. The paper had once enclosed something else. Something no longer there. The missing enclosure may have mattered more than the signatures themselves. Weeks later, while reviewing overlooked shipping insurance claims in Charleston, a graduate student discovered a tiny notation written sideways in the margin of one damaged file. The handwriting belonged to the same confidential bookkeeper. There could be little doubt now. His writing appeared everywhere, quietly linking records no one had previously associated. This final notation contained only a single instruction. Hold until testimony received. Testimony. The word electrified the research team. Not rumor. Not inventory. Testimony. Someone had expected a witness to speak. The obvious question followed immediately. Who? The answer appeared to be waiting inside another courthouse collection that had remained uncatalogued for more than a century. Among hundreds of neglected depositions sat one sealed packet. Its label was faded almost beyond recognition. But one line remained readable. It bore the date from the autumn of 1836. And beneath it, in careful script, were 6 words that changed the entire direction of the investigation. Statement of the surviving witness. The sealed packet had remained untouched for generations. Not because anyone intended to hide it. Because no one realized what it contained. The faded label identified only a routine deposition connected to county business. Nothing suggested it belonged to one of the Lowcountry's oldest historical puzzles. When conservators carefully unfolded the brittle pages, they found no sensational confession. They found testimony. Measured. Careful. Given under oath. The witness was neither a planter nor a government official. He was a commission clerk assigned to record statements during a private inquiry requested by several influential landowners. That detail alone explained why no criminal trial followed. The inquiry had never been intended for a public courtroom. It was meant to settle a crisis quietly. The clerk described a gathering at a riverside building near the Plantation landing. Present were several respected planters, a county magistrate, an attorney, the sheriff, and one enslaved man brought under guard. The testimony never explained why he had been summoned. But one sentence changed everything. The witness stated that the enslaved man read aloud from the plantation account. Read aloud. Not questioned. Not accused. He was asked to read. Historians immediately returned to the insurance survey. The literate laborer. The reader. The connection finally became clear. The missing field hand had not become dangerous because he rebelled. He became dangerous because he could read records that others assumed would remain safely locked inside plantation offices. The clerk's testimony continued. During an inventory prepared after the plantation owner's death, conflicting account books had emerged. The numbers did not match. Property totals differed. Land transfers appeared inconsistent. One version listed assets that another omitted. The discrepancies threatened inheritance claims and outstanding debts involving several neighboring plantations. Under ordinary circumstances, accountants might have resolved the errors. Except one problem remained. The enslaved reader had previously copied portions of the original books. He knew which ledger had been altered. He knew which pages had disappeared. And because he could read, he understood exactly what had changed. That knowledge transformed him from a trusted worker into a dangerous witness. The testimony stopped short of accusing anyone of forgery. Instead, it referred repeatedly to mistaken entries, earlier misunderstandings, necessary corrections. The language was cautious, painfully cautious. No one wanted the written record to imply criminal intent. Even so, the fear became unmistakable. The magistrate reportedly warned those present that any public dispute over falsified estate inventories could trigger lawsuits reaching Charleston. Creditors would demand answers. Business partners would examine old accounts. Neighboring estates might also face scrutiny. One altered ledger could expose years of questionable bookkeeping. Silence suddenly made perfect sense. Not because of one man. Because too many fortunes rested upon the same fragile network of trust. Then came the moment historians had searched for. The clerk described what happened after the reading ended. The attorney proposed that every conflicting document be collected. Originals separated. Copies compared. Several records destroyed. Fresh inventories prepared. The magistrate agreed. So did the plantation owners. No vote was recorded. No formal order survived. Only quiet agreement. The bookkeeper's mysterious note suddenly became understandable. Original destroyed. He had not written those words as speculation. He had recorded what he witnessed. The stitched ledger survived only because someone overlooked one volume. Every other disputed account appears to have disappeared. Yet one question still remained. What happened to the reader? The testimony answered that as well. Not dramatically. Not all at once. The sheriff objected to immediate punishment. According to the clerk, the sheriff argued that the man had committed no crime. He had merely performed duties assigned to him. The attorney reached a different conclusion. He warned that leaving the reader on the plantation would invite endless rumors. Every overseer, every clerk, every laborer who knew the story would continue talking. The magistrate proposed another solution. Transfer him quietly. Far away. Without public notice. Without newspaper advertisements. Without legal proceedings. The room accepted the recommendation. That explained the Georgia inventory. The private transfer. The missing sale record. The special passenger aboard the coastal vessel. Even the ferryman's extraordinary payment. The reader had not escaped. He had been removed. Quietly. Deliberately. Legally enough to avoid obvious questions. Illegally enough to erase the paper trail. But history held one final surprise. The clerk added a short paragraph after the meeting concluded.